This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Oil prices eased slightly on Tuesday as traders gauged the potential for supply disruptions after U.S. guidance for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz kept attention squarely on tensions between Washington and Tehran. Brent crude oil futures were down 18 cents, or 0.26%, at $68.85 a barrel by 0353 GMT. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude fell 21 cents, or 0.33%, to $64.15. That's after prices rose more than 1% on Monday, when the U.S. Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration advised U.S.-flagged commercial vessels to stay as far from Iran's territorial waters as possible and to verbally decline Iranian forces permission to board if asked.
OPEC's oil output fell in January due to lower supply from Nigeria and Libya, a Reuters survey found on Monday, which offset increases in members including Venezuela after the U.S. capture of Nicolas Maduro and the ending of an oil blockade. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries pumped 28.34 million barrels per day in January, down 60,000 barrels of oil per day from December's total, the survey showed, with Nigeria posting the largest decline. OPEC+, comprising OPEC and allies including Russia, in January began a first-quarter pause of its monthly output increases amid concerns of a supply glut.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
The European Union has proposed extending its sanctions against Russia to include ports in Georgia and Indonesia that handle Russian oil, the first time the bloc would target ports in third countries, a proposal document showed on Monday. The proposal, reviewed by Reuters, would add Kalevi in Georgia and Karimun in Indonesia to the sanctions list, barring EU companies and individuals from conducting transactions with either port. The measures form part of the EU's 20th sanctions package over Russia's war in Ukraine. The package was jointly drafted by the EU's diplomatic service, the EEAS, and the European Commission, and was presented to EU countries on Monday. EU sanctions require unanimity in order to be adopted into law.
Britain secured a record amount of solar power in an auction offering guaranteed electricity price contracts to renewable projects, the government said on Tuesday, as it seeks to meet its clean energy targets and drive down costs. The country has a target to largely decarbonize its electricity sector by 2030, which will require a huge scale-up of renewable power, including wind and solar. A total of 6.2 gigawatts of onshore wind, solar and tidal power projects won contracts with the bulk, some 4.9 gigawatts, going to solar. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. India's steel exports will continue to be impacted by the European Union's carbon tax and import quotas, and the government will take steps to help the sector, the Federal Steel Secretary said on Monday. The comments come days after India and the European Union signed a trade deal, which slashed tariffs on several sectors but left the bloc's carbon border tariff, called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, intact. Indian steel mills ship roughly two-thirds of their total exports to Europe. India's steel exports to Europe are expected to fall as a consequence, prompting mills to seek alternative buyers in Africa and the Middle East, Reuters reported.
Indonesia has identified 8 mining blocks with large potential for rare earth elements and plans to launch 2 research projects to develop rare earth processing technology, the head of a government mineral industry agency said on Monday. Indonesia, an archipelago and the largest economy of Southeast Asia, has large reserves of a number of critical minerals as well as deposits of rare earth elements. Rare earths are a group of 17 elements including 15 silvery white metals used to make magnets, which in turn power motion for electric vehicles, cell phones and missile systems. The archipelago is also the world's largest producer of nickel products as well as the biggest exporter of tin.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Indian farm unions and opposition parties have called for nationwide protests against the new India-US trade framework, saying it risks hurting the farm sector by allowing more US imports, although the government says key staples are protected. The agreement has become a political flashpoint, reviving memories of the 2020-21 farm law protests, when the government was forced to repeal 3 laws aimed at deregulating agricultural markets. The government has defended the pact, saying farmers' interests are protected by excluding imports of grains such as rice, wheat, corn and dairy products, while growers of basmati rice, fruits, spices, coffee and tea would gain duty-free access to the US market.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.